Morning all, let's have a look at one of the mega clashes in the recent Bilbao Masters between Magnus Carlsen and Fabiano Caruana, so both child prodigies in their own right. Fabiano is a rising Italian star, done fantastically in recent months. He's playing black against Magnus in round 6. E4 for Magnus, and we saw a French defence from Fabiano. And after now, not D4 but D3. D3 is actually quite good statistically against the French defence in particular. The King's Engine attack style setup, so which usually involves fianchettoing the bishop and getting a kind of coiled spring position. It's what Fischer used to play in his youth a lot, and then he started to play more sharper theoretical lines. So, but it's a great system in its own right, not having to learn perhaps so much opening theory, playing more on general principles, and an often appearing plan, I would argue, from the King's Engine attack setup is a light square strategy, because usually when black plays d5 and then later might play e5, d5 square in particular, and the light square complex in general is often made use of from white, because white is looking at light squares here, like with a fianchetto. It's a light square plan in general. So okay, d5, knight d2, knight f6, and now knight gf3. Knight c6 is played, which does show that an idea might be later to take maybe and play e5 to liberate this bishop on c8, because with the knight on c6 you wouldn't expect so much a fianchetto of the bishop here. Now c3, bishop d6. Now actually g3 isn't played here. A more solid perhaps move is played, not weakening any light squares on the king's side for the moment, bishop e2, but maybe later the bishop can come back to g2 if needed, if after g3, that is, after g preparation. So it's in a way a more flexible setup, like a reverse old Indian sort of style setup. Both sides now castle, a5. Okay, because white might have been intending b4 and maybe b5 later. If black wants a pawn on e5, that's going to be more significant for undermining a pawn on e5 if white can get in b4, b5. But a5 comes at a little cost here. It is a target potentially. Some light squares are feeling a bit weaker now after a5. Rook e1, and now we see it, e5, a change in the centre. And the light square strategy of white is more pronounced now after this structural change taking place. Although black has liberated the bishop, it's the light square strategy for white which is played on now. E takes d5, knight takes d5. e5 is an immediate tactical target though on this semi-open e-file. Knight c4, with the option of taking the bishop, but white really doesn't want to do that. Usually just wants to maybe drop back the bishop and cause some more weaknesses potentially if black is forced to defend e5 in an uncomfortable way. But black doesn't have to use his f-pawn, he can use the rook to add support for e5. And now bishop f1, putting more pressure on e5. And now the seemingly annoying pin, bishop g4. Bishop's kicked immediately, bishop h5. And now, okay, now with f4 looking a little bit more vulnerable perhaps, this move g3 is played, which not only covers f4 with the pawn, but the bishop can come here potentially. Fabiano tries in this position to undermine the c4 knight to get rid of the pressure on e5. He plays knight b6, not minding doubled pawns. So in a way this is a dynamic retreat. For the double pawns, what will he get? Well, Magnus does take on b6. So for the double pawns, can the c file be used? there's less pressure on e5 for sure. Is d3 an issue? Can more pressure be built on d3 here? Or is it this mobility here? b5, b4 maybe? Does white want to try a4 here to lock down the double pawns to make sure b5 is not possible? Well, we'll go in more detail with an engine inspection in the second pass through this game. For the moment, b5 wasn't on the top of Magnus's concerns. He just plays bishop g2, and in fact b5 is now played, and now a4, okay, encouraging b4, and Magnus is perhaps not concerned about this position. He's got a peg on b5. He can play now bishop e3, which is highlighting perhaps white is going to try and use the dark square weaknesses later. Bishop c7, queen b3. A nice place for the queen perhaps. Bishop's made that possible by protecting that knight earlier. No tactical disasters just yet. But what about the d3 pawn? Is that in pre here? Well, intuitively it might seem unwise. I'm not going to do a detailed inspection here, but rook d1 and the queen can, it seems as though the queen can retreat, but if it goes to f5 then there's g4. If it goes to g6 there might be knight h4, rook d7. We'll check that out later. There might even be other moves here, but we'll check that out in the second pass. The pawn wasn't taken basically. h6 was played. And now, actually, as well as protecting the pawn, the queen can now, after queen c4, make its influence felt more on the knight, so preventing b6. Also, queen b5 might be annoying at some point. Black takes on c3 and tries to make use of the queen as a tactical target now. So a few forcing moves are thrown in here from black. And what is the outcome of these forcing moves? Well, let's see. So the first forcing move is e4, vacating the square e5. The second one, bishop takes f3. So that now, after bishop takes, knight e5 is a fork, forcing the queen back. Another forcing move, knight takes f3, queen takes f3. What is the positional outcome which had to be evaluated here? White is temporarily a pawn up, same coloured bishops. Queen d3, going to win back that pawn. Or is he? You might think, well, the bishop's pinned, so it can't play this, you lose the queen. How do you protect the pawn? How do you protect e4? It is a double attack. Okay, Magnus plays here king g2, so the bishop is now free to move potentially to d4. So what does black do? He regains his pawn. He doesn't take the one on c3. It looks as though that's asking for trouble because of rook c1. If queen e5, bishop f4 looks pretty strong intuitively. Okay, queen takes e4 is the one chosen to regain the pawn. So the outcome, a simplification, with white seemingly having, you could label this a backward pawn and a semi-open file, but on the other hand, there's a backward pawn and a semi-open file. So which one is more significant in this position? The queens are about to come off after this next move. Not queen e4 here, but Magnus invites black to exchange off queens with his next move, bishop d4. And he doesn't mind the queen for two rook situation. That would seem potentially very dangerous. For example, queen b7 after, or there might even be stronger stuff. But queen b7 looks as though actually it's winning material straight off the bat. Doesn't look possible. So the queens are coming off here with the king, with the advantage that the king is made more active now. Queen takes f3, king takes f3, but is this king actually going anywhere? Well, there's something else as well as the backward pawns on the asymmetry and the files, there's another evaluation criteria we can apply here. While king activity, white's slightly more active. Light square control, which is often used, the often major application of this king's engine attack system is a light square strategy. And here b5 is very nice to park a rook on for a lateral attack on a5, keeping pressure on b7. Black prepares for the worst, patterns down the hatches. He plays b6 and he starts defending now or not. b6. He's got a more passive bishop as well, that's another thing to factor in now. So rook ac8 is played to counter-attack. Exchange of prisoners, as Nimzovich would say. Exchange this prisoner for this one. Is Magnus having the exchange of prisoners? No, he refuses. Doesn't want an exchange of prisoners. It will just be equal for black, surely anyway. Black's rooks would be active. It will just be 2 rooks each with symmetrical pawn structure. Forget that. You know, if we have takes, what's the point? There's no point here. And the king having to go back, and in fact losing the rook. It's not even pliable. So rook e3 there. Sorry, rook e3 is the only move, and that wouldn't be so nice. So no, Magnus' idea is he needs to get his king to be more active, and there's a very nice move which is the prelude to getting a more active king, and then going back to torture not just b6 but these light squares, to ride on the light squares here. So how do we do that? Rook e4 is coming up here. Rook e4. Not minding an exchange of rooks. You can imagine the king is going to come in strongly here. g6 is played, as though f5 might be useful, but that's locked down. And the pawns are coming off the dark square bishop squares. They're going on to light squares here. Complementary to the bishop. King f8. And now Magnus is wanting to put a light square squeeze and maybe make use of f5 later if he can dent g6. So he plays h4 if he tries to undermine g6. Black takes, and now the king's a bit more active, so the minor piece quality is slightly in white's favour here. And the king position, king goes to d3 for the moment, and now the bishop drops back to attack h6, and now that beautiful square b5 is made use of. Black's definitely on the back foot. He's having to defend, nanning his weakness on b6. Can he counter-attack? Well, this is one of the points now. Bishop d8, the pawn can now go forward, supported by the rook on it on b5 as well. Laterally, trying to weaken Black's dark squares. Check. King c4. Check. King d5. The king is walking in now, offering c3 finally here, but it's not taken. Rook e6 is played. Check. Now f4, putting the squeeze on the king side. So getting some space, squeezing black a little bit on the king side. Check. Rook c6. Okay. Rook b1 now. The rook did its duty for the moment there. Black surely has to resolve this tension because the rook's now prepared to deploy on this h file to maybe target h6 after an hg, and that would be quite unpleasant. Okay. No, the tension is maintained with king e8. So we see now a frontal attack on h6. hg, fg, rook h1. For the moment it's tactically defended, of course. It looks as though rook takes check, wins the rook. So no big deal here to leave the pawn on pre. But the king enters d5 again, check, and then goes to c4. So it's got the opportunity to go to b5, and h6 is now really threatened. That's protected here. G takes f5, protecting h6 as well. And now this pawn is kind of prevented from going to f6, otherwise that would be a nuisance, because then there'll be again rook h6 renewed as a threat. So bishop d8. But here, look at white's king, and the pawns, the bounty is the king activity for the pawns, and look at black's king. So basically, if this pawn could be got rid of, then these two pawns are sitting ducks, unfortunately for black. And Magnus is putting real pressure on black now with this next move, this ending. This is, I assume, completely now advantageous for white, because what on earth can black do about this position with h6 attacked? Pawn, the communication defense has been stopped. King g6 looks unpleasant to allow a check and say rook g7 maybe, but we'll check after technically even more. This is just a casual walkthrough to start off with. In this first pass, black plays bishop takes f6, very committal move. So we get an exchange on h6, and now rook c6 is harmless, king d5, and there's no other check there. So we get a forced simplification of the rooks now, it seems. Rook takes d6, bishop takes d6, leaving the king to try and win these two pawns with the assistance of the bishop. The king's too far away. Two pawns are about to go down. One pawn. And not immediately taking the other, but I suspect it's all pretty diabolical now for black. Two pawns down. Looks fairly hopeless, this position. Black is just driven back. Plays on a bit. I don't really think he believed it was some sort of draw, this position. White can surely force through, break the blockade. He resigns here. It looks as though bishop d8 to break the blockade. Not a silly move, of course, like c7. Then you could just take and have a draw here, stalemate draw, and the bishop's not on the right colour of that final score anyway. So no, break the blockade with bishop d8 and then c7. But let's check here, just in case there's any tricks. Let's check with the engine from this position and then go back. I don't think there is any tricks. If the bishop c7, there's no tricks at all. If bishop b6, we play bishop d8, and then it's hopeless again. But let's go back to the start. See technically this game. So you don't have to play sharp, razor sharp theory. You can use even this system to get a small advantage. White's got a slight tiny plus, a quarter of a pawn, one could argue, from an engine point of view, almost 0.25. So this dynamic actually is liked. This dynamic move is liked by the engines. It seems as though technically, did Magnus have to take on b6? Is g4 any better? Well, no, actually I don't know. It's too low a depth to actually reach any definite conclusion about g4 here. Knight b6 looks logical in its own right actually as well. So bishop g2, b5. What about a4? Was that a move, you might ask, to clamp down? Bishop c5, black's doing okay. So it's no big deal really to, well, with the pawn actually here, I think potentially there's some weaknesses exposed that aren't actually, and the pawn does support the bishop on c5, so that's interesting that Magnus wasn't really that bothered by this b5, b4. So there's no secure bishop on c5 in this line. White's got control of c5. So bishop c7, queen b3. So let's experiment with taking here. I think this was just non-playable, but okay. So if queen f5, I think g4, as I mentioned. There's nothing really else. Queen e4 just looks to be asking for it. Knight g5. And if queen g6, g4 trapping. Okay. You wouldn't really want to do queen e4. If queen a6, g4 again. Now bishop f1. Where's the queen going? Oh, the queen's in trouble here. Big trouble. Just losing a piece. It's the loser piece. That's a... So yeah, the pawn is a poisoned pawn here. So h6 is played instead, which weakens actually f5 potentially. Weakens some light squares. But okay. Queen c4 takes e4, start of a forcing sequence. Now here, did black have to go in with this forcing sequence to this ending? He could have tried attacking d3, for example. Let's have a look at this. So rook c8. Still looks pleasant for white, this b5, the light squares. Okay. It looks as though white has good position. Is a move like queen takes b7 actually playable? Yes, the queen can escape. Okay, so let's go back. The forcing sequence is played e4, so we get a sort of transition into nearly an ending. Well, queens are still on after this forcing sequence for a little bit. King g2, very strong move by Magnus. So if the queen took here, yes, that does definitely look poisoned to rook ac1. And if queen e5, yes, bishop f4. Just to confirm that. Okay, so king g2, queen took. And white has a nagging advantage. Bishop d4, is it stronger than queen e4? Doesn't matter, you can take and then play bishop d4. Apparently that's about the same. Okay, so doesn't really make that much difference. The king is still is good here. White's got this edge here, it seems. So all aspects take into account. The engine's preferring white here, even though you might think both sides have the backward pawn and semi-open files. There's other factors here. The bishop's the active king. Okay, and the white rooks, well, both rooks are connected and protecting each other. But this b6, without b6, why does black have to play b6, you might ask? Say f6. Rook b5, natural outpost square. Ganging up. White's quicker to gang up on b6. c4, let's say. And believe it or not, c5, just trying to undermine a5. Alright, that's a plan for white anyway, so a5 could be a target there. b6 here, just with this small advantage. So where does it become critical? Gradual decline for black, or was there something sudden which appeared? So white's advantage picking up with this h5. Now hg is mentioned in this position as quite critical for black. Magnus chose actually f4. Okay. hg or okay is f5. f5 is also light. So white's advantage still steady, not too huge right now, but it's once this ganging up on h6 occurred. Now you might think, well, can black stop the frontal attack with g5 at any point? Like here, was g5 possible? Was that too committal? Maybe it's too committal, it's not a big deal. It's leaving white with a nice position still, king d5. Like maybe start to work over here. Let's have a quick look at this. The king goes over here. And can white force through an advantage? Yeah, so we can take on b6 here. So what would white be threatening now? Let's go with this bishop just to get the rooks off, I guess. The king's really going to walk on the light squares like this. get the rooks off and then target b6 again. Okay, that could be a general plan. Just to check a general plan there. So the frontal attack is allowed, which is to be black's doom. That is important to investigate g5 here. Is that convincing that actually b6 is going to be black's downfall? The king walking like this potentially on the light squares, the rooks coming off, and b6 still being a target in the ending. These pawns would be away from the dark square bishop on the light squares, so there'll be no problems to face here for white's pawns. Okay, so in the game, the frontal attack led to, I believe, g takes f5 is mentioned here as critical mistake. Now g5 in this position, well, the frontal attack has emerged, but g5 in this position, still white's better. White's better here. So I think black's really on the back foot now. Magnus is forcing an even better ending scenario with his king near the pawns. Okay, so the king is really becoming, the king position is just decisive now in this game. Black's pawns just sitting ducks, so to speak, and the rest is quite here, just to force through the pawn with bishop d8. Wow. So I think, honestly, I get the impression Magnus has been described as the Mozart of chess, and yes, I get that impression from his games. He doesn't need to use cutting edge theory. He can get small advantages, and he's often putting opponents under gigantic endgame pressure. Gigantic endgame pressure. And he's carving out rating points, and he's nearly achieving Kasparov's all-time rating. I think he's within 10 points of it now. So this guy, Magnus Carlsen, has really a totally different approach to Kasparov, because Kasparov was wrecking people from openings. A lot of opening theory from Kasparov was wiping them out. They were having severe disadvantages out of the opening middle game. And before this Bilbao, actually, I saw some criticism of Magnus not doing that great, or I think in an earlier round encounter with Fabiano, actually. I think we need to check out that game. It was mentioned, oh, maybe Magnus needs to learn tons of opening theory, but if he can win endgames, why not? Just play quiet openings and put the opponents under huge positional pressure and transition that pressure into winning endgames. Why not? Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.